Hey there, this is John from the Red Dice Diaries, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Cold Iron zine with art by John Cates, written by Joshua Mann and John Cates again. So let's hit the theme tune and then we'll crack on with this review. Okay, so Cold Iron, as I said earlier, is written by Joshua Mann and John Cates. The art is by John Cates. I'm looking at a review copy. It's a PDF that's 46 pages long and it uses single colour printing. Cold Iron is a short rule system and associated setting that is meant to evoke a pre-Tolkien fairy tale sort of vibe. This zine is going on Kickstarter soon. I'm assuming it's as part of Zine Quest 2, although the author didn't explicitly say that. The author Joshua Mann was, however, kind enough to send me a review PDF. Now, if you don't know how my reviews work, maybe you've not seen one of them before, what I tend to do is I give each of the products I review a rating based on 4 categories. And those are writing, the look of the book, the system, and the background. I give each of those ratings a minus if it's not so good, a blank if it's a bit mediocre, or a plus if it's pretty darn good. Then I add up all of those different ratings to come up with a final rating for the product, which I then compare with the trusty fate table you can see there to come up with a final rating to let you know what I think of the thing overall. So let's get cracking on Cold Iron. So, in terms of the writing, I've given this book a blank. The introduction, which you can see there, seems pretty flowery and lengthy to me. I can see what the author was attempting, trying to convey a fairy tale mood, but especially in a zine where space is limited, after all they're trying to fit in rules and adventure and a sort of mini campaign background, I think the space could have been better used. 3 pages of introduction before you get to this character gen section isn't really needed. Luckily, once the introduction is out of the way, the writing becomes more punchy and to the point. Now, in terms of the look of the book, I've had to give it a minus. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, that Zine Quest 2 mandates that zines can only use a single colour, and I'm assuming that influenced the creation of Cold Iron. Unfortunately, in my view, they chose to go with this sort of bright red colour you can see there. And whilst I love the colour red, I mean, just look at my logo there, and my online handle, the name of my YouTube channel, etc. I did find the colour a little bit trying on the eyes, especially on a PDF on a screen after reading it for a long time. It's possible this may not be the case in the printed version if the ink is a bit darker, but I think sort of picking a darker colour to start with would have been a wiser choice. After all, there's a reason why black and white is such a classic. The artwork, which you'll have seen a little bit on the cover, but I'll page through and see if I can find another piece of it, is fairly simplistic, but it serves the book well. Obviously there's limited space and they're trying to go for a bit of a sort of old school feel. We can see there the Cold Iron Knight, one of the classes that's involved. It's a fairly simple little piece, but it does help to break up the text a lot. Again, I'm not too keen on the bright red coloration, but the artwork itself, although simplistic, is pretty nice. I like a bit of that. That's fine by me. Okay, so one of the best parts of the layout for me, if I skip back a bit, are these sort of box outs that you get. You can see one of them there, and they're scattered throughout the book. And they tend to provide alternatives and a little bit of commentary. In this case, it's an example of play, but unfortunately, most of the box outs, this one actually looks pretty good, but most of the box outs, I mean, if I scroll back and try and find you an example, yeah, here we go. If you look at that one there, they don't really have enough space around the actual box art, and nor is the border clear enough, so it tends to feel crammed and sort of squeezed in amongst the main body of the text. Okay, so how does the system bear up? Now, I've given the system a blank. It's pretty much a sort of version of D&D with what feels like a few sort of mechanics from more narrative games sort of tacked onto it. Characters have 4 stats, which are body, dex, will and instinct. They have a level from 1 to 5 and a class. All fairly traditional mechanics, but the characters also have descriptors that grant them small bonuses, putting me in mind of a sort of pared back version of aspects from the Fate RPG system. The game also uses milestone advancement and levelling up, which, although it has been making appearances in D&D, and I'm sure people have been using it for years, I personally tend to associate it more with narrative or storytelling games. The basic methods of action resolution are attribute checks, with the player rolling to beat a challenge rating, or saving throws, which are determined by class. And again, these seem like very traditional sort of D&D style mechanics. Characters also have 2 resources, which are named Blood and Sweat. Some nice evocative names there. Blood effectively represents your physical health. It's your hit points, it's your health, your vitality, whatever you want to call it. And the second, Sweat, is used to trigger class abilities, and it can also be spent to reduce damage, making your characters a little bit more survivable than in your sort of traditional OSR game, but also giving you a sort of a limit on your class abilities rather than just saying so many times a day, which is an interesting idea. I don't know how it would work in play. I'd have to give it more of a thorough examination, but it certainly sounds interesting. Equipment and weapons are highly abstracted, and Mook level NPCs get minimal stats, which just what is necessary to use them basically, which I think it's a very wise choice given that this is billed as a simple pick up and play style of game, and given the limited space available in such a zine formatted book. So let's move on to talk a little bit about the classes. Now, the classes are interesting. They give you some stat modifiers, an attack bonus, a few abilities, and some extra equipment. We saw one of them earlier, the Cold Iron Knight, a chivalric order amongst Fey courts and human society dedicated to the preservation and accumulation of secret knowledge. There's an interesting mix of different sort of fairy tale tropes and ideas that have been sort of pushed in there, and we get things like mortals who battle the Fey, people who've been touched by Fey magic, religious pilgrims, that sort of thing. A lot of these are recognisable easily from the source material, which is obviously this pre-Tolkien sort of fairy tale shtick that we were talking about earlier. The setting of the zine itself is an interesting hodgepodge of fairy tale tropes. And I quite like this, so for the background, I've given this a plus. Now, my only issue is that the sort of brief taster you get of the world that Cold Iron takes place in is frustratingly brief. It gets expanded on slightly in the short 6-page adventure, The Hunter in Bordeaux, a fairly linear depiction of a strange Fey takeover of a town. I think the authors have done a decent job giving us a jumping off point in a small amount of space, but to be honest, I wouldn't expect to just be picking up the book and running this adventure straight out of the book. You're going to need to have some additional prep time, or you're at least going to need to be comfortable with improvising several things quite heavily. The book rounds off after the adventure with a nice no-nonsense character sheet, which you can see there. Now, it's certainly not going to win any artistic awards, but it does exactly what it says on the tin, so I have no problems with that. So, looking at the ratings that I've given the various different categories, and adding them up, I can see we get an overall rating of +0, which is a mediocre rating. Now, I don't want you to think that this means Cold Iron is a bad product, because, to be honest, it's not. I think it's got some interesting ideas in it. A workable system that didn't exactly set my mind aflame, but it's serviceable. And it's probably going to be available far more cheaply than many books which have far less merit. I think that for a first attempt at self-publishing a zine, this is actually not too bad. And with some tweaks, could actually be pretty good. So my advice to the creators of this would be, 1, remove the system and use the freed up space to focus on detailing your setting more. After all, that's the really interesting bit. Now, there's a few extra interesting little optional bits, the blood and sweat idea, etc., which get added into the roles, which is absolutely grand, but you could have just had a page detailing them and used an existing system like BX or Old School Essentials or something like that, and saved yourself an awful lot of space. And to be honest, it's the variant classes and the background that are most interesting thing about this. Number 2, I'd advise them to take another look at the layout, add borders and spacing to their tables, and add some space before and after headings. 3, change the colour used from bright red to a darker colour, or just go for good old-fashioned black and white. Since recording this view, I've actually heard from the author Joshua that they're going to make available a standard black and white PDF along with the red and white PDF, which I think is a very wise choice on their behalf. And I certainly think the black and white PDF will probably be easier on the eyes, particularly when you're looking at it on a computer screen, and that would be my personal preference. And finally, 4, just add a little bit of graphical embellishment to that character sheet over there. Now, there are still some changes to be made prior to the Kickstarter going live, but if you're interested in picking up a copy of this, I believe the PDF is going to cost around $5. You'll be able to get it from Kickstarter, and I'll put a link down below. Once the Kickstarter's ended, it's going to be available on itch.io, and again, I'll put a link in the description. So if you've got $5 lying around and you want a sort of rough and ready sort of homebrew D&D style system, or you're in the mood for something with a little bit of a sort of fey flavour to it, you might want to give this a look, see what you think. It might be worth your time, and like I say, there are some interesting ideas in it. So that's been my review of the Cold Iron zine that's coming out soon on Kickstarter by Joshua Mann and John Cates. I hope if you've enjoyed this RPG review, you'll consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Obviously, you can click on that bell icon to get notifications when I put out future videos. Until I see you next time, take care, and whatever you're playing out there, or whatever setting it is, have fun. I'll catch you soon.